All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking what I like to call the age-old moral panic relay race. You know exactly what I mean, right? If you've ever heard someone groan about kids these days, you've witnessed it firsthand. But as we're going to see, the truth hiding in the actual data is way more fascinating than those tired old stereotypes.
There's this fantastic quote that hits the nail right on the head. It goes, in 1971, kids cutting class were assumed to be protesting. Today, they're assumed to be doing drugs or doom scrolling. I mean, that just brilliantly captures the perpetual anxiety older generations hold on to. There is always this baked-in assumption that the youth of today are somehow way more reckless, more lost, or just more dangerous than they were. But really, it's the exact same anxiety, just wearing a different outfit.
It really is just a relay race of pure panic. On one side, you've got the classic older generation's viewpoint. Man, kids today are just so much worse and wilder. But the reality is that the substances might change, but the underlying reasons stay exactly the same. Every 20 years or so, society just hands off the baton of anxiety. People reach for things to numb stress, to find a community, or just to rebel a little bit. That core human element, yeah, that never actually changes. So here's our roadmap for the explainer today. We're going to cover the generational moral panic, then break it down by generation. We've got baby boomers with protests and pills, Gen X with skeptics and raves, millennials dealing with prescriptions, Gen Z focusing on sobriety and control, before we wrap it all up with same stuff, different decade.
Let's jump right into part 1, baby boomers, protests and pills.
Picture it. It's 1969. The counterculture is absolutely booming, and substances are being framed as these deep, profound political statements. Let's make this a bit more personal and look at a composite character. We'll call him Frank. Frank is 19. He's a working-class kid who just got a draft notice in the mail, and he smokes a joint for the very first time at a campus sit-in. For kids like Frank, this wasn't about just checking out and getting high. Not at all. It was about sharing this profound fear, standing shoulder to shoulder in a crowd of angry, terrified peers, and finally finding a sense of belonging during a deeply chaotic moment in history.
Now, if you look at the data, it completely shatters the modern narrative. Peak past-year marijuana use at ages 18 to 20 for boomers was sitting at nearly 50%. That is massive. Compare that to the 30 to 35% peak for Gen X and millennials. So contrary to all the panic, boomers actually had the highest peak marijuana use in their youth compared to literally any of the generations that came after them.
But here's a wild twist. The boomer story didn't just end when the 60s faded out. For people in the 60 to 64 age bracket today, the data shows that marijuana use and opioid misuse have actually jumped significantly. And why is that? Well, they're getting older. They're trying to treat chronic pain, recovering from joint replacements, battling insomnia, all while carrying those lifelong coping instincts right into their senior years. Frank didn't stop coping. His paperwork just changed.
All right, moving right along to part 2, Generation X, Skeptics and Raves.
This is the latchkey kid generation. They were coming of age right smack in the middle of the crack epidemic and the massive cultural explosion of MTV. Think about a teenager for this era. Let's call her Renee. She's 15, comes home to an empty house every single day, and is constantly bombarded with terrifying DARE warnings at school. And yet, she ends up finding her community at illegal warehouse raves. For Gen Xers like Renee, there was this stark, almost ironic contrast. The institutional messaging she was getting felt exaggerated and fake, but the vibrant, pulsing belonging she found in early rave culture, that felt incredibly real. It wasn't the earnest political idealism of the boomers, it was a detached, skeptical search to just find her people.
And when we compare the data across decades, it reveals a massive shift. Boomer sedative misuse historically sat around 10%, but Gen X sedative misuse plummeted to under 3%. Gen X didn't just blindly inherit their parents' habits. Actually, with doctors growing way more cautious and new medications hitting the market, this generation practically ended the barbiturate era. They observed what was happening, they adapted, and they totally shifted the trend.
Which brings us to part 3, Millennials, Prescriptions, and Wellness. So, Millennials. They came of age online, weathered the massive 2008 economic recession, and inherited a devastating opioid epidemic that, tragically, often started right inside a trusted doctor's office. Meet our persona for this era, Chris. He's 17, tears his ACL playing football, and gets what seems like a completely routine yet highly addictive painkiller prescription post-surgery. For kids like Chris, substance dependency wasn't born out of some desire to rebel or expand their minds. It was literally handed to them by a healthcare system long before anyone fully understood or communicated the severe addictive risks involved.
And the data from that era is genuinely sobering. When we look at peak prescription painkiller misuse at ages 19 to 20, millennials vastly outnumber both boomers and Gen X. They face the highest rates of prescription painkiller misuse of literally any generation before them. It's an incredibly heavy inheritance and a completely different origin story than that 60s counterculture rebellion.
But, there's another defining side to this generation that we absolutely cannot ignore. Millennials are the ones who effectively normalized therapy. They dragged mental health right out of the shadows and fundamentally shifted how we talk about it. They started treating substances, like cannabis for example, way less as a rebellious forbidden fruit and much more as a wellness product. We're talking about something you might literally keep on your nightstand right next to your daily vitamins just to manage burnout.
Next up, Part 4, Generation Z, Sobriety and Control.
Now, from the outside looking in, this generation's relationship with substances is, frankly, pretty confusing. It's a landscape packed with striking paradoxes. Let's look at a teen today, our composite Priya. She's 19 and actively avoids binge drinking. Why? Because of digital permanence. She knows a bad video of her getting sloppy at a party is going to last forever online, and she desperately wants to maintain control of her image. Yet, at the exact same time, she vapes regularly and is super curious about trying therapeutic mushrooms because she heard about their optimizing benefits on a wellness podcast.
It's like you're reading two completely opposing headlines at the exact same time. On one hand, they are the most sober generation on record, with the lowest alcohol use. But on the other hand, you see tripled vaping rates and rising psychedelics. So how on earth are both true? Well, because they are both driven by Gen Z's ultimate desire for control over their bodies. Alcohol is viewed as a blunt, messy tool that makes you lose your edge, whereas these other substances are marketed to them as precise, manageable, and optimized for self-improvement.
But we really have to talk about the terrifying reality driving this intense need for control: fentanyl awareness. Previous generations, they worried about getting caught by the cops or eventually getting addicted. Gen Z is the very first generation that has to live with the terrifying reality that any unprescribed pill might contain a lethal hidden dose. Their caution isn't necessarily more moralistic than their parents. It's a realistic survival instinct in a supply chain that is fundamentally more unpredictable and dangerous than ever before.
Let's bring it all together in Part 5, Same Stuff, Different Decade.
When you really step back and look at the big picture over the last 40 years, it becomes so incredibly clear. While the culture, the healthcare systems, and the specific dangers evolve, human nature stays remarkably, stubbornly consistent. From boomers to Gen X, right through to millennials and Gen Z, the specific substance trend shifts, the cultural catalyst shifts, but that underlying why, that remains exactly the same: belonging, coping, control. Whether it's a joint at a 1969 sit-in, warehouse raves in the 80s, post-surgery pills in the 2000s, or wellness vape today, that underlying human need, it never, ever changes.
So, that leaves us with one incredibly provocative question to close out this explainer. When the next generation inevitably comes of age, what will they reach for? And more importantly, will we finally understand why? Instead of defaulting to yet another endless moral panic about kids these days, can we finally offer the next generation understanding instead of anxiety? I'm going to leave you with that question to ponder.